The team needs pitching. It needs top-end pitching. That hasn't changed in a year. Will they go either spend the money or the prospect capital to bring in a top-of-the-rotation starter? That hasn't changed in a year. And if they don't do that, Alex, I don't know if they are legitimately more of a division-winning contender than they were a year ago. Do you think this is the winter they will go do that?
So the answer comes with caveats, right? Like, which isn't a great starting point. But we asked Craig Breslow even before the end of the season, like, do you need a number one starter? And he said, well, every team would love to have one, and there are different ways to get one, right? So it was hedging a little bit. I think that the question is, do you grab an established number one starter, or do you kind of roll the dice on saying, like, we really like some of this pitcher's traits, and we believe that we can get more out of him, and thus we can turn him into it, right? Like, how would we feel like if the offseason was signing a Lugo equivalent? Like, how would we feel about that, right? Like, I don't think anyone would feel like they had answered the number one question, but there's a chance that they would ultimately get to that. Now, I don't know that that's good enough for the Red Sox this offseason, given the kind of given the kind of ire and frustration with the way that they've operated for a number of years now, and the fact that they haven't had aggressive moves to say, like, this is a ceiling guy, right? Like, this is the guy who's going to transform the win expectations if he performs to his career track rather than requiring a breakout. This is the guy who's going to propel the team forward. It's a pretty good market to be able to really aggressively find really good pitchers, right? Like, you have Blake Snell back on the market. That guy is a monster. Like, I talked to Kyle Snyder, the Rays pitching coach, about him. Kyle Snyder couldn't have had more glowing things to say about what he believes Blake Snell is going to be for the next several years. He has been performing at the caliber of one of the best pitchers in baseball for several years, not necessarily always consecutively, but that's a really good pitcher. You have Max Fried in Atlanta, who's really, really good and has been the foundation of a rotation that has been a perennial powerhouse. You have Jack Flaherty, who was awesome this year, looked kind of ace-ish for both the Tigers and the Dodgers. Now that's what the Red Sox would like to sign, the kind of 2023-24 offseason version of Jack Flaherty in all likelihood. But again, I don't know whether or not they can afford to take a bet on someone and say, like, we're going after his upside, rather than getting someone who's already at the level of all-star version of Jack Flaherty. And then, of course, there's the Garrett Crochet question. And for me, I just think that this is the offseason where the Red Sox trade for starting pitching. They don't love the risk associated with the long-term deals of starting pitchers who are going to be in their mid and late 30s. By the way, I didn't even mention Corbin Burns as a free agent. But to me, their best moves have typically been the trades for pitchers. Trading for Chris Sale worked out great. They gave up a big prospect haul, worked out great though. Trading for Josh Beckett worked out as exactly what they wanted it to be. And that Beckett model is kind of where Garrett Crochet is, right? Like, a guy who hasn't necessarily delivered the innings of an ace, but who has shown the stuff of an ace. And they have such a deep farm system. Craig Breslow has talked about there are more talented players than there are future position spots on the diamond. So I don't know. To me, that's what this offseason feels like. You trade for starting pitching, and then you address some other needs, particularly right-handed power with less strikeouts than what they've had. That would be my guess. But that's a lot of speculation. Tom, you reading in the leaves? What do you see?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. And I'm literally checking off the names that I have listed on my piece of paper as you talk. There's your Burns and your Fried and your Flaherty and your Snell.
You don't have very many notes, Tom. That's a pretty limited
page
list.
One.
Yeah,
that's the headlines. You got to go deep in my binder. It's all up here, Alex. I agree with you, though. I think they are, if they were, here's the concern. And again, you detailed this in your piece, but I couldn't help but think over the last couple of months that it was, the Seth Lugos, the Shota Imanagas, right? The guys that they were purportedly in on, who, whether through their aversion to risk or their inability to or unwillingness to up the ante in what they would pay, not get those guys. Zach Eflin, I spent a lot of last year talking about he probably would have single-handedly helped you get to the playoffs last year. If you had what he did with Tampa in 2023, that might have been the difference to at least put them in a position at the trade deadline where they would have added more definitely rather than not. And by all accounts, they probably could have had Zach Eflin without breaking the bank. So if that is the concern at the free agent market, if you're not willing to extend yourself on those names, I can't see Corbin Burns walking through that door anytime soon. Or even what I would have thought midseason, what Jack Flaherty might get would be, and now you look at some of the projections on what he'll get in the offseason. And again, so I think to your point, they have a surplus of prospect capital. They have a surplus of position players that if you trade the right guys in the right combination, you should be able to bring in the type of starter you talk about. And, all of a sudden, that whole homegrown trio of players who made 30 starts, of pitchers who made 30 starts this year, starts to look a whole lot better when you talk about them as 2 and 3 and 5 with Giolito thrown in there somewhere and Cooper Criswell and Richard Fitz and Quinn Priester all backing them up with legitimate depth as they continue to mature. I would feel real good about that group if you told me the opening day starter is not on this roster right now and that the rest of the starting rotation is. I'm great with that. You got to work on the bullpen, as you said, and we'll get into right-handed power in a minute. But it all begins to me, and I think that, by the way, is a step in the right direction from a year ago where I thought before Giolito you needed 2 legitimate starting pitchers added to the mix. I think you get away with 1 right now. And I do think that making a trade is probably the smarter way to go because you probably get a younger guy who's under control and is more affordable. So we've got the rotation figured out. What about right-handed power? Could they dive into the free agent? Is Alex Bregman walking through that door, even though his teammates say there's no way he's played his last game as a member of the Astros. But would they make a splash to bring in a bat to add to the lineup?
Yeah, I hesitate a little bit. Like for me, I don't know, just viscerally, I don't really feel like Bregman is the right target necessarily. And I for a number of reasons. I think that the power has played well the power has played really well in Houston. He might be playing in the only park where his swing would work better for him than it does at Fenway, right? Like so there's a little bit of there's a little bit of funhouse mirrors with regards to the right-handed pull power. There's probably some there's you're going to see decline in it, right? So like, do you want 5 years down the road to be paying $20+ million a year for Alex Bregman, like doubles hitter at Fenway Park, right? And the answer is maybe, but I wonder, like, it is a tricky area because they have to address a lot of things all at once from the position side, right? They need to get more right-handed. We've heard that a lot. They need to get more right-handed power. We've heard that a lot. They need to get better defensively. We've heard that a lot. How do you do that? Particularly while you do have an incoming class of stud prospects, right? Where you're hoping that they start filling up the middle of the field. But I don't know, maybe the answer is you don't worry too much about the timetable of the stud prospects and you sign best players available. I'm curious about, we've obviously heard about the possibility of re-signing O'Neill, though the strikeout problem is there, and the defensive value was limited. Like, is there a way that they could explore Willy Adames? That guy is such a good two-way player. I actually wondered a lot about that last offseason when the Brewers had a for sale sign, which is kind of crazy to think about given where they've gone. But Adames is a really good player who is up the middle. He has experience on both sides of second base. Do you think about pairing him with Trevor Story and then using some of your glut of middle infielders? Like, do you trade out Vaughn Grissom along with one of the decorated AAA prospects in order to pursue a pitcher and get Adames to pair with Story up the middle? Like, there are different ways to approach this. It's a really interesting one because I would say there's a greater shortage of position players who fit on the free agent market, like who are just kind of like the bullseye hits, than there are pitchers.